Question 1. Market research demonstrates that organizations are increasingly concerned about the speed at which digital forensic investigations can be conducted following a suspected security incident. In a scenario where a critical server is suspected of being compromised, and there is immense pressure from management to quickly identify the extent of the breach and recover any exfiltrated data, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for a computer hacking forensic investigator? Option A. Instruct the IT department to immediately wipe and re-image the suspected compromised server to restore normal operations, while the forensic investigator focuses on reviewing available backups for signs of intrusion. Option B. Initiate a forensic imaging of the suspected compromised server using write-blocking hardware and create a bit-for-bit copy of the entire storage media, ensuring all subsequent analysis is performed on the forensic image. Option C. Immediately connect to the suspected compromised server using administrative credentials to begin copying all log files and system data to a separate analysis machine, bypassing the standard imaging process to save time. Option D. Begin interviewing key personnel and reviewing network traffic logs from other devices on the network to infer the nature of the compromise before directly accessing the suspected server. The correct answer is C. Immediately connect to the suspected compromised server using administrative credentials to begin copying all log files and system data to a separate analysis machine, bypassing the standard imaging process to save time. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the urgency of a potential data breach and the need for meticulous, legally compliant forensic investigation. The investigator must balance the immediate demand for information with the long-term implications of evidence integrity and admissibility. Failure to adhere to established protocols can compromise the investigation, lead to legal repercussions, and damage the organization's reputation. The pressure to provide rapid answers without compromising the forensic process requires a structured decision-making framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the preservation of evidence integrity and adherence to established forensic procedures, aligning with the principles of the 312-49 Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator curriculum. This involves documenting all actions meticulously, maintaining a strict chain of custody, and avoiding any actions that could alter or contaminate the digital evidence. This methodical approach ensures that any findings are defensible in a legal context and that the investigation can proceed with reliable data. This aligns with the foundational principles of digital forensics, which prioritize accuracy, integrity, and admissibility of evidence, as implicitly guided by the investigative standards expected within the scope of the 312-49 certification. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing immediate data retrieval over evidence preservation. This could lead to the alteration or destruction of critical forensic artifacts, rendering the evidence inadmissible in legal proceedings. Such an action directly violates the core tenets of digital forensics and the investigative standards expected of a certified professional. Another incorrect approach is to bypass established documentation protocols in the interest of speed. This compromises the chain of custody and the ability to reconstruct the investigative steps, making it impossible to verify the integrity of the evidence. This failure to document is a significant ethical and regulatory breach in any forensic investigation. A third incorrect approach is to make assumptions about the nature of the breach without conducting a thorough, evidence-based analysis. This can lead to misdirected investigative efforts, wasted resources, and potentially overlooking crucial evidence. It demonstrates a lack of professional rigor and a departure from the systematic, evidence-driven methodology required by the 312-49 certification. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the following. 1. Immediate containment and preservation. Secure the affected systems to prevent further damage or data loss, while simultaneously initiating measures to preserve evidence. 2. Documentation and chain of custody. Meticulously document every action taken, from initial system access to evidence acquisition, ensuring a clear and unbroken chain of custody. 3. Systematic forensic analysis. Follow established forensic methodologies to acquire, analyze, and interpret digital evidence without altering its state. 4. Communication and reporting. Maintain clear and concise communication with relevant stakeholders, providing updates based on verified findings and adhering to reporting protocols. This structured approach ensures that the investigation is both effective in identifying the root cause and compliant with legal and ethical standards. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows that a forensic investigator is tasked with examining a suspect's workstation for evidence of unauthorized access to a corporate network. The investigator has received a verbal directive from a manager to begin the examination immediately, but no formal written authorization or warrant has been provided. The investigator is aware that company policy requires written authorization for all forensic examinations. Which of the following actions best represents the appropriate professional and legally compliant approach for the forensic investigator in this situation? Option A. Contact the company's legal counsel to seek guidance on how to proceed, bypassing the manager's directive. Option B. Politely inform the manager that the examination cannot commence without proper written authorization as per company policy and legal requirements, and request that the necessary documentation be provided. Option C. Proceed with the examination as directed, documenting the verbal instruction and the lack of written authorization, while prioritizing the collection of evidence. Option D. Begin a preliminary examination to assess the scope of the potential evidence, with the understanding that a formal examination will follow once authorization is secured. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the examination as directed, documenting the verbal instruction and the lack of written authorization, while prioritizing the collection of evidence. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the forensic investigator must balance the need for thorough evidence collection with the legal and ethical obligations to preserve data integrity and respect privacy. The investigator's actions directly impact the admissibility of evidence in legal proceedings and can have significant consequences for individuals and organizations. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of digital forensics within the strict confines of the law. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres to the established principles of digital forensics and the specific legal framework governing such investigation. This involves obtaining proper authorization, documenting all actions meticulously, and employing forensically sound methods to acquire and analyze evidence. This ensures that the evidence is admissible in court and that the investigation is conducted ethically and legally, respecting the rights of all parties involved. Adherence to these principles is mandated by the legal framework for computer hacking forensic investigations, which emphasizes the importance of unbiased, objective, and legally compliant evidence handling. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing authorization procedures is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates legal requirements for search and seizure, potentially rendering any collected evidence inadmissible. This demonstrates a disregard for due process and the rule of law. Another incorrect approach, such as failing to document the forensic process, leads to a lack of transparency and accountability. This undermines the credibility of the investigation and can be grounds for challenging the evidence in court. It also fails to meet the professional standard of meticulous record-keeping expected of a forensic investigator. Furthermore, an approach that involves altering or destroying potential evidence, even unintentionally, is a severe ethical breach and a violation of forensic principles. This compromises the integrity of the investigation and can lead to miscarriage of justice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and adherence to established forensic methodologies. This framework involves 1. Understanding the scope of the investigation and obtaining all necessary legal authorizations. 2. Planning the forensic process, including identifying the evidence to be collected and the tools to be used. 3. Executing the forensic procedures in a forensically sound manner, ensuring data integrity. 4. Meticulously documenting every step of the process. 5. Analyzing the evidence objectively and reporting findings accurately. 6. Maintaining chain of custody throughout the investigation. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical server has been compromised, and immediate data recovery is required to identify the extent of the breach and potential exfiltration of sensitive information. The forensic investigator has been tasked with examining the server's hard drive. Which of the following actions best adheres to the principles of digital forensics and ensures the integrity of the evidence? Option A. Directly connect the compromised hard drive to a forensic workstation and begin searching for relevant files and logs. Option B. Wipe the compromised drive clean to remove any traces of the attacker's activity before performing a recovery. Option C. Perform a quick keyword search on the original drive for terms related to the suspected breach without creating a full image. Option D. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the compromised hard drive, and then conduct all analysis on the forensic image. The correct answer is D. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the compromised hard drive, and then conduct all analysis on the forensic image. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the forensic investigator must balance the immediate need for data recovery with the potential for introducing new evidence or altering existing evidence, which could compromise the integrity of the investigation. The investigator's actions must adhere strictly to established forensic protocols to ensure that any findings are admissible in legal proceedings. The core of the challenge lies in making informed decisions under pressure, where the wrong choice could lead to the destruction of critical evidence or a flawed conclusion. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the preservation of evidence integrity above all else. By documenting all actions meticulously and using forensically sound methods, the investigator ensures that the collected data is reliable and can withstand scrutiny. This aligns with the fundamental principles of digital forensics, which demand that the original evidence remain unaltered. The process of creating a forensic image before any analysis is a cornerstone of this practice, ensuring that the original data is protected. An incorrect approach that involves directly analyzing the original drive without creating a forensic image fails to uphold the principle of evidence preservation. This action risks altering the original data through the very act of analysis, potentially destroying or modifying critical evidence. This violates the ethical obligations of a forensic investigator and would likely render any findings inadmissible in court, as the chain of custody and evidence integrity would be broken. Another incorrect approach, such as performing a quick scan for specific keywords without a documented plan or forensic imaging, demonstrates a lack of systematic methodology. This can lead to overlooking crucial evidence or misinterpreting findings due to an incomplete or biased examination. It bypasses essential steps that ensure thoroughness and objectivity, thereby compromising the professional standards expected in digital forensics. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the incident and the objectives of the investigation. This involves consulting with legal counsel and relevant stakeholders to define the scope and permissible actions. The investigator must then meticulously plan the forensic process, prioritizing evidence preservation through imaging and hashing. All actions taken must be documented in detail, creating an auditable trail. Continuous adherence to established forensic methodologies and ethical guidelines is paramount, ensuring that the investigation is conducted with integrity and that the findings are defensible. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a recent data exfiltration event, with initial reports suggesting a limited number of compromised user accounts. However, the potential business impact is significant, involving sensitive customer information. As the lead forensic investigator, which approach best balances the need for a swift initial response with the imperative to conduct a thorough and legally defensible investigation? Option A. Prioritize the forensic imaging of all servers within the network, regardless of their direct connection to the reported incident, to ensure no data is missed. Option B. Immediately isolate and analyze the most technically complex systems identified by the IT department, assuming these are the primary targets of the exfiltration. Option C. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify all potentially affected systems and data, iteratively refining the investigation scope based on evolving findings and stakeholder input. Option D. Strictly adhere to the initial stakeholder request, focusing only on the explicitly mentioned compromised user accounts and their immediate data access logs. Correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify all potentially affected systems and data, iteratively refining the investigation scope based on evolving findings and stakeholder input. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics where the initial scope of an investigation, driven by stakeholder requests, may not fully encompass the potential breadth of a security incident. The difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need for information with the forensic investigator's responsibility to conduct a thorough and legally sound examination. Overly narrow scoping can lead to missed evidence, incomplete findings, and ultimately, an ineffective response that fails to address the root cause or full impact of the compromise. Conversely, an overly broad scope without justification can lead to wasted resources and potential legal challenges regarding the relevance and necessity of the collected data. The professional challenge is to navigate this tension by employing a systematic impact assessment that informs scope adjustments based on evolving understanding of the incident. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a dynamic impact assessment that iteratively refines the investigation scope. This begins with understanding the initial reported incident and its potential ramifications. The forensic investigator must then identify systems and data that are likely to contain relevant evidence, considering the nature of the suspected compromise. This process should involve consultation with relevant stakeholders, e.g., IT security, legal management, to gather intelligence and confirm understanding of the business impact. Based on this assessment, a preliminary scope is defined. As evidence is collected and analyzed, the investigator must be prepared to reassess the impact and adjust the scope to include newly identified affected systems or data sources. This iterative process ensures that the investigation remains focused on the most critical areas while remaining flexible enough to adapt to new discoveries, thereby maximizing the chances of uncovering the full extent of the incident and its consequences. This aligns with best practices in incident response and digital forensics, emphasizing thoroughness and adaptability within legal and ethical boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. Adhering strictly to the initial, potentially limited, stakeholder request without any reassessment of the incident's impact is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of proactive investigation and a passive acceptance of a potentially insufficient scope. It risks overlooking critical evidence, leading to an incomplete understanding of the compromise and potentially exposing the organization to further risks or legal liabilities. This approach violates the ethical obligation of a forensic investigator to conduct a comprehensive examination, focusing solely on the most technically complex systems without considering the broader business impact or the potential for simpler, yet equally damaging, attack vectors is also professionally unsound. While technical depth is important, an investigation must be guided by the potential impact on the organization's operations, data integrity, and legal standing. This narrow technical focus can lead to an investigation that is technically proficient but strategically deficient, failing to address the core issues driving the incident. Prioritizing the collection of all available data from all systems, regardless of its potential relevance to the incident, represents a significant failure. This approach is not only inefficient and resource-intensive, but also raises serious privacy and legal concerns. Without a reasoned basis for collection, it can lead to the acquisition of privileged or sensitive information that is not pertinent to the investigation, potentially violating data protection regulations and creating unnecessary legal risks. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a failure to apply the principles of proportionality and relevance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in digital forensics must adopt a decision-making process that begins with understanding the reported incident and its potential business and technical impact. This requires active engagement with stakeholders to define the problem space. The next step is to develop a preliminary investigation plan and scope based on this understanding, prioritizing areas of highest potential impact and relevance. Crucially, this plan must incorporate mechanisms for continuous reassessment. As evidence is gathered and analyzed, the investigator must critically evaluate whether the initial scope remains adequate or if adjustments are necessary to address newly discovered information or evolving understanding of the incident's scope and impact. This iterative approach, guided by a clear understanding of the potential consequences of the compromise, ensures that the investigation is both thorough and efficient, adhering to professional standards and legal requirements. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a full system image acquisition of a critical production server will yield the most comprehensive evidence, but it carries a significant risk of extended downtime, potentially impacting millions in daily revenue and client service. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for a computer hacking forensic investigator to take in this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify less intrusive methods for evidence acquisition that still meet investigative objectives and document the rationale for the chosen approach. Option B. Rely solely on the organization's IT department's assessment of the downtime impact and proceed with their recommended course of action. Option C. Proceed with the full system image acquisition immediately to ensure no evidence is lost, as the integrity of the investigation is paramount. Option D. Advise the organization to shut down the server temporarily to allow for a complete forensic acquisition, prioritizing evidence preservation above all else. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify less intrusive methods for evidence acquisition that still meet investigative objectives and document the rationale for the chosen approach. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a forensic investigator to balance the immediate need for evidence collection with the potential long-term impact on an organization's operations and reputation. The investigator must make a judgment call that could affect business continuity, client trust, and regulatory compliance, all while adhering to strict legal and ethical standards. The pressure to deliver timely results must be tempered by a thorough understanding of the broader consequences of their actions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive impact assessment before proceeding with intrusive forensic actions. This aligns with the principles of proportionality and necessity, often embedded in digital forensics guidelines and ethical codes. By understanding the potential business disruption, data loss, and reputational damage, the investigator can select the least intrusive method that still yields the necessary evidence. This proactive approach minimizes collateral damage and demonstrates a commitment to responsible evidence handling, which is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the trust of stakeholders. It also helps ensure that the evidence obtained will be admissible by demonstrating that all reasonable steps were taken to avoid unnecessary harm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately seizing all systems without a prior impact assessment. This fails to consider the potential for significant business disruption, which could lead to financial losses and operational paralysis. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of consideration for the organization's well-being beyond the immediate investigative goal. Legally, it could be challenged as an overreach if less disruptive methods were available and feasible. Another incorrect approach is to delay evidence collection indefinitely due to fear of negative impact. This is professionally unacceptable as it obstructs justice and fails to fulfill the investigator's primary duty. It also risks evidence degradation or destruction, rendering the investigation futile. Ethically, it prioritizes avoiding conflict over the pursuit of truth and accountability. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the client's assessment of impact without independent verification. While client input is valuable, the forensic investigator has a professional responsibility to conduct their own objective assessment. Over-reliance on the client's potentially biased or incomplete assessment could lead to overlooking critical risks or, conversely, to unnecessary caution that hinders the investigation. This can create an ethical conflict of interest and compromise the integrity of the forensic process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the investigative objectives. This is followed by an assessment of potential evidence sources and the methods available for acquisition. Crucially, a thorough impact assessment, considering technical, operational, financial, and reputational factors, must be conducted. This assessment should inform the selection of the most appropriate and least intrusive forensic techniques. Documentation of the entire process, including the rationale for decisions made, is paramount for accountability and defensibility. Collaboration with relevant stakeholders, such as legal counsel and IT management, is also essential to ensure all perspectives are considered. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that a critical server has been compromised, potentially exposing sensitive customer data. The incident response team is under immense pressure to quickly identify the extent of the breach and contain it. The lead forensic investigator arrives on site and is tasked with determining the best immediate course of action to preserve evidence while initiating the investigation. The investigator has the option to directly access the live system to search for indicators of compromise, attempt data recovery directly from the suspect drive, perform a quick keyword search on the live system, or create a forensically sound image of the affected drive before any analysis. Option A. Perform a quick keyword search on the live system. Option B. Directly access the live system to search for indicators of compromise. Option C. Attempt data recovery directly from the suspect drive. Option D. Create a forensically sound image of the affected drive before any analysis. The correct answer is D. Create a forensically sound image of the affected drive before any analysis. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid incident response and the strict legal requirements for evidence preservation. The forensic investigator must balance the urgency of containing a potential data breach with the imperative to collect and handle digital evidence in a manner that maintains its integrity and admissibility in legal proceedings. Failure to adhere to proper procedures can render crucial evidence useless, compromise the investigation, and lead to legal repercussions for the organization and the investigator. The investigator's judgment is critical in determining the appropriate level of intervention, while ensuring all actions are defensible. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased methodology that prioritizes immediate containment and assessment, while meticulously documenting every step and preserving the original evidence. This aligns with the core principles of digital forensics, emphasizing the chain of custody and the need to avoid altering the original source of data. By creating a forensic image, the investigator works on a bit-for-bit copy, ensuring the original evidence remains untouched. This preserves its integrity, making it admissible in court. Documenting all actions, including the tools used, timestamps, and methodologies, is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and transparency, which are often mandated by legal frameworks and ethical guidelines for forensic investigations. This approach upholds the integrity of the investigation and the evidence. Correct approach is analysis. Directly analyzing the live system without creating a forensic image is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action directly violates the principle of preserving the original evidence. Live analysis can alter volatile data, e.g., RAM contents, running processes, network connections, which may be critical to the investigation and is often time-sensitive. This alteration compromises the integrity of the evidence, making it inadmissible in legal proceedings and undermining the entire forensic process. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of adherence to established forensic best practices and potentially violates legal requirements for evidence handling. Ignoring the need for a forensic image and proceeding with data recovery directly from the suspect drive, even with the intention of speed, is also a critical failure. This approach risks altering the original data through the recovery process itself. Without a forensically sound image, it is impossible to prove that the recovered data is an accurate and unaltered representation of the original state of the drive. This lack of integrity makes the recovered data unreliable and inadmissible. It also bypasses essential steps for documenting the original state of the evidence. Performing a quick scan for specific keywords on the live system without proper imaging or documentation is another failure. While seemingly efficient, this action can modify file system metadata, e.g., access times, and potentially alter the state of the system. It also bypasses the fundamental requirement of creating a forensically sound copy of the evidence before any analysis is performed. The lack of a complete forensic image means that the investigator cannot definitively prove the state of the system at the time of the incident, or that the scan data is representative of the original evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in digital forensics must adopt a systematic and defensible approach. The decision-making process should always begin with understanding the legal and regulatory landscape governing evidence collection and preservation within the relevant jurisdiction. This involves prioritizing the integrity of the evidence above all else. When faced with an incident, the investigator should first focus on containment and preservation. This typically involves creating a forensically sound image of the affected systems. All subsequent analysis should be performed on this image. Meticulous documentation of every step, tool, and finding is paramount. This ensures transparency, reproducibility, and admissibility of evidence. If time is a critical factor, the investigator must still adhere to these principles, perhaps by prioritizing the imaging of the most critical systems first, rather than compromising the integrity of the evidence itself. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that a critical server within a financial institution has been compromised, potentially exposing sensitive customer data. The forensic investigator arrives on site and observes that the server is still running and accessible via the network. The investigator is aware that the perpetrator may still be actively attempting to exfiltrate data or cover their tracks. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to preserve the integrity of potential evidence? Option A. Log into the server remotely using administrative credentials to quickly assess the extent of the breach and identify any active malicious processes. Option B. Immediately disconnect the affected server from the network to prevent further unauthorized access or data modification, and then proceed to create a forensically sound image of the server storage media. Option C. Begin examining files and logs directly on the live server to gather immediate indicators of compromise. Option D. Wait for explicit instructions from the legal department before taking any action, as the situation is sensitive and requires legal guidance. The correct answer is B. Immediately disconnect the affected server from the network to prevent further unauthorized access or data modification, and then proceed to create a forensically sound image of the server's storage media. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics: the potential for evidence contamination or alteration during the initial seizure and preservation phase. The urgency to secure potentially volatile data, coupled with the need to maintain the integrity of the evidence for legal proceedings, creates a high-stakes environment. The investigator must balance the need for rapid action with meticulous adherence to established forensic protocols. Failure to do so can render the evidence inadmissible, jeopardizing the entire investigation and potentially leading to legal repercussions for the investigator and the organization. Professional challenge lies in making informed decisions under pressure, ensuring that every action taken is justifiable and defensible within the legal and ethical framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately isolating the affected system from the network and initiating a forensically sound imaging process. This aligns directly with the core principles of digital forensics, particularly the need for evidence preservation and integrity. By disconnecting the system, the investigator prevents further unauthorized access, modification, or deletion of data by external actors or even automated processes. Creating a bit-for-bit forensic image ensures that an exact replica of the original data is captured, allowing for analysis on a copy without risking the alteration of the original evidence. This process is crucial for maintaining the chain of custody and demonstrating that the evidence presented in court is the same as what was originally seized. This methodology is implicitly supported by the principles of evidence handling and admissibility as understood within the U.S. legal system, which emphasizes the integrity and authenticity of digital evidence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Directly accessing and examining files on the live system without creating a forensic image is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach risks altering the very evidence being sought. File system metadata, such as access times, modification times, and creation times, can be inadvertently changed by simply opening or viewing a file. This alteration can be used by the defense to argue that the evidence has been tampered with, rendering it unreliable and inadmissible. Furthermore, it violates the principle of non-repudiation, as the investigator cannot definitively prove that the data examined is identical to the data originally present on the system. Attempting to remotely access the system to gather information without physically securing it first is also professionally unacceptable. This introduces a high risk of remote tampering or data destruction by the perpetrator or other malicious actors. It bypasses the critical step of physical seizure and containment, which is fundamental to establishing control over the evidence. This approach also compromises the chain of custody, as the investigator cannot guarantee that the data accessed remotely is the same data that was present at the time of the incident. Ignoring the incident due to a lack of immediate clear instructions from legal counsel is a failure to act responsibly and ethically. While legal guidance is important, digital forensic investigators have a professional obligation to preserve and secure potentially critical evidence. Delaying action can lead to the irretrievable loss of evidence, which can have severe consequences for the investigation and any subsequent legal proceedings. The investigator should take immediate steps to preserve the evidence and then seek legal counsel regarding the scope and direction of the investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in digital forensics must adopt a systematic and protocol-driven approach. The decision-making process should prioritize evidence preservation and integrity above all else. This involves 1. Immediate containment. Secure the scene and isolate the affected systems to prevent further compromise. 2. Forensic imaging. Create a forensically sound bit-for-bit copy of the original media. 3. Documentation. Meticulously document every step taken, including the tools used, the time of each action, and any observations made. 4. Chain of custody. Maintain a strict chain of custody for all evidence collected. 5. Legal consultation. Engage with legal counsel to understand the legal parameters and objectives of the investigation. This structured approach ensures that actions are defensible, evidence is admissible, and ethical standards are upheld. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a high probability of a critical data breach occurring within the next 72 hours, necessitating immediate containment. A forensic investigator is tasked with responding to a suspected intrusion on a critical server. Which of the following actions, if taken as the first step, best aligns with the principles of computer hacking forensics and ensures the integrity of potential evidence? Option A. Begin live analysis of system logs and running processes on the server to quickly identify the source and nature of the intrusion. Option B. Contact the organization's IT department to restore the server from the most recent clean backup. Option C. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the affected server's storage media before any other investigative or remediation actions are taken. Option D. Immediately initiate system remediation by isolating the server and beginning to remove any identified malicious software. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate system remediation by isolating the server and beginning to remove any identified malicious software. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid incident response and the strict legal requirements for evidence preservation and chain of custody. The forensic investigator must balance the urgency of containing a potential data breach with the imperative to collect and handle digital evidence in a manner that maintains its admissibility in legal proceedings. Failure to adhere to proper procedures can render critical evidence useless, jeopardizing both the investigation and any subsequent legal action. The investigator must also consider the potential impact of their actions on the ongoing business operations of the affected organization. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a systematic, forensically sound methodology that prioritizes the integrity of the evidence. This involves creating a forensic image of the affected system's before any live analysis or remediation efforts are undertaken. This ensures that the original data remains unaltered, providing a verifiable baseline for investigation. This aligns directly with the principles of digital forensics and the legal standards for evidence admissibility, which require that evidence be collected and handled in a way that prevents tampering or alteration. Adhering to established forensic protocols, such as those implicitly or explicitly guided by the principles underpinning the 312-49 curriculum, is paramount for maintaining the integrity and defensibility of the findings. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that immediately attempts to remediate the suspected breach by deleting files or shutting down systems without first creating a forensic image is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action directly compromises the integrity of the evidence, making it impossible to determine the full scope of the incident, the methods used by the attacker, or the extent of data exfiltration. Such an action would violate fundamental forensic principles and likely render any subsequent findings inadmissible in court, undermining the entire investigation. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct live analysis on the compromised systems without proper documentation and forensic imaging. While seemingly expedient, this can inadvertently alter volatile data, like RAM contents or network connections, that is crucial for understanding the attack. This lack of a forensically sound baseline means that the investigator cannot definitively prove that the evidence they are examining is representative of the original state of the system at the time of the incident. This failure to maintain a pristine copy of the original data is a direct contravention of best practices in digital forensics. A third incorrect approach involves relying solely on the organization's IT department's existing backup systems for forensic analysis without independent verification or imaging. While backups can be useful, they are not a substitute for direct forensic imaging of the live, compromised systems. Backups may not capture all relevant volatile data, could have been compromised themselves, or may not be in a format suitable for forensic analysis. This approach risks relying on potentially incomplete or altered data, failing to meet the rigorous standards required for digital evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in computer hacking forensics must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes evidence integrity above all else. This involves 1. Understanding the legal and regulatory landscape governing digital evidence in the relevant jurisdiction, implicitly guided by the 312-49 exam scope. 2. Developing a clear incident response plan that incorporates forensically sound procedures for evidence acquisition. 3. Executing a systematic process that begins with imaging the affected systems to create a write-protected, verifiable copy of the original data. 4. Conducting analysis on the forensic image, not the original system, to preserve its integrity. 5. Meticulously documenting every step of the process to maintain the chain of custody. When faced with conflicting priorities, such as speed versus thoroughness, the professional must always default to the procedures that ensure the admissibility and reliability of the evidence. Question 9. Assessment of the most appropriate initial forensic approach when investigating a live server suspected of hosting an active phishing operation, considering the imperative to preserve volatile data and maintain evidence integrity for potential legal proceedings. Option A. Power down the server immediately to prevent further activity and then create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the entire storage device. Option B. Directly copy critical files and directories identified as potentially related to the phishing operation from the live file system using standard operating system utilities. Option C. Utilize the server's built-in logging and monitoring tools to gather information about recent network activity and user logins without employing specialized forensic acquisition software. Option D. Immediately initiate a forensically sound acquisition of volatile memory and running processes, followed by meticulous documentation of all actions and tools used, before proceeding to create a forensic image of the storage media. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a forensically sound acquisition of volatile memory and running processes, followed by meticulous documentation of all actions and tools used, before proceeding to create a forensic image of the storage media. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid evidence acquisition in a live system and the imperative to maintain data integrity and adhere to legal discovery protocols. The investigator must balance the urgency of a potential ongoing criminal activity with the strict requirements of evidence handling to ensure its admissibility in court. Failure to properly document and preserve the chain of custody can render crucial digital evidence useless, jeopardizing the investigation and potential prosecution. The dynamic nature of live systems, where data can be altered or lost, adds another layer of complexity, demanding a methodical and legally sound approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased methodology that prioritizes the preservation of volatile data while meticulously documenting every step. This aligns with best practices in digital forensics, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the integrity of the evidence. The initial phase of identifying and acquiring volatile data, e.g., running processes, network connections, logged-in users, is critical because this information is transient and will be lost upon system shutdown or reboot. This acquisition must be performed using forensically sound tools and techniques that minimize any alteration to the live system. Concurrently, comprehensive documentation of the entire process, including the tools used, their versions, the exact commands executed, and the timestamps, is essential for establishing the chain of custody. This meticulous documentation is a cornerstone of digital forensic investigations, ensuring that the evidence can be authenticated and defended in legal proceedings, adhering to principles of due process and admissibility. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that immediately shuts down the system to create a forensic image of the storage media, while seemingly efficient, fails to capture volatile data. This regulatory and ethical failure stems from the potential loss of critical evidence that exists only in RAM or active processes. Such an oversight could lead to the exclusion of vital information, undermining the investigation's thoroughness, and potentially violating the principle of collecting all relevant evidence. Another incorrect approach would be to directly copy files from the live system without employing forensically sound imaging tools or documenting the process. This method risks altering the original data, introducing metadata changes, or missing hidden files and system artifacts. Ethically and legally, this constitutes a failure to preserve evidence integrity and maintain a proper chain of custody, rendering the evidence unreliable and inadmissible. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the operating system's built-in tools for data collection without validation or forensic imaging would be problematic. While these tools might provide some information, they are not designed for forensic acquisition and may not capture all necessary data or may alter system states in ways that compromise evidence integrity. This represents a failure to employ appropriate forensic methodologies, which are implicitly required to ensure the reliability and admissibility of digital evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, evidence-centric decision-making framework. This begins with understanding the legal and regulatory requirements governing digital evidence in the relevant jurisdiction. Next, they must assess the nature of the system under investigation and the potential types of evidence to be recovered, paying particular attention to volatile data. A plan should be developed that prioritizes data preservation and integrity, utilizing forensically sound tools and methodologies. Throughout the investigation, meticulous documentation of every action taken is paramount. This structured approach ensures that evidence is collected legally, ethically, and in a manner that maximizes its admissibility and probative value in any subsequent legal proceedings. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that in the immediate aftermath of a suspected network intrusion, a forensic investigator's primary objective is to secure and preserve potential evidence. If an investigator discovers a compromised workstation exhibiting unusual network activity and signs of unauthorized file modification, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure the integrity of digital evidence? Option A. Delete any suspicious files or processes identified on the workstation to mitigate further damage and prevent data exfiltration. Option B. Continue monitoring the workstation's network activity remotely to gather more information before taking any physical action. Option C. Access the workstation directly to investigate the unusual network activity and attempt to identify the source of the intrusion by examining live system logs. Option D. Immediately create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the workstation's hard drive using a hardware write blocker, and then disconnect the workstation from the network. The correct answer is D. Immediately create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the workstation's hard drive using a hardware write blocker, and then disconnect the workstation from the network. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics: the potential for evidence contamination and the need to maintain the integrity of digital evidence. The investigator must balance the urgency of the situation with the meticulous procedures required to ensure the admissibility of evidence in a legal proceeding. The professional challenge lies in making rapid, informed decisions under pressure, while adhering to strict forensic protocols and relevant U.S. legal frameworks governing digital evidence. Failure to do so can render the evidence inadmissible, jeopardizing the investigation and potential prosecution. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately isolating the affected system from the network to prevent further unauthorized access or data alteration. This is followed by creating a forensic image of the system's storage media using a write blocker. This ensures that the original evidence remains unaltered, a fundamental principle of digital forensics. The subsequent analysis is performed on the forensic image, not the original drive. This methodology aligns with established best practices and legal standards, such as those outlined in the Daubert Standard and Federal Rules of Evidence, which require scientific evidence to be reliable and relevant. The chain of custody must be meticulously documented at every step, from acquisition to analysis, to demonstrate that the evidence has not been tampered with. Incorrect approaches analysis. Directly accessing and analyzing the live system without first creating a forensic image and using a write blocker is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach risks altering volatile data, e.g., RAM contents, running processes, network connections, and potentially overriding or modifying critical evidence on the disk. Such actions would violate the principle of evidence preservation and could lead to the evidence being deemed unreliable and inadmissible in court under U.S. legal standards. Deleting or modifying files on the live system, even with the intention of removing malicious content, is a severe breach of forensic protocol. This constitutes tampering with evidence, a criminal offense in itself, and would irrevocably compromise the integrity of the investigation. It directly violates the requirement for preserving evidence in its original state. Ignoring the incident and waiting for further instructions without taking any immediate containment measures is also professionally unacceptable. While awaiting authorization is sometimes necessary, a complete lack of action in the face of a suspected security breach can lead to the loss or destruction of critical evidence, hindering the investigation and potentially allowing the attacker to cause further damage. This demonstrates a failure to act responsibly and proactively in safeguarding potential evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic, protocol-driven approach. The decision-making process should prioritize evidence preservation and integrity above all else. This involves 1. Immediate containment. Isolate the affected system to prevent further compromise. 2. Evidence acquisition. Create a forensically sound copy of the evidence using appropriate tools, write blockers, imaging software. 3. Chain of custody. Meticulously document every step of the process, including who handled the evidence, when, and why. 4. Analysis. Conduct all analysis on the forensic image, never on the original evidence. 5. Reporting. Document all findings accurately and objectively. This structured approach ensures that any evidence collected is admissible in legal proceedings and upholds the ethical obligations of a forensic investigator. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that a forensic investigator has been tasked with examining a network server suspected of hosting illegal content. The initial report is vague, suggesting a broad range of potential illicit activities. The investigator has full physical access to the server. What is the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain the integrity of the investigation? Option A. Begin a deep packet inspection of all network traffic to and from the server, as this will capture all potential evidence of illegal activity. Option B. Immediately image the entire server's storage devices and begin a broad keyword search for terms related to illegal content, without further authorization. Option C. Obtain a detailed scope of investigation and legal authorization, clearly defining the specific allegations and the types of data to be examined. Before commencing any forensic imaging or analysis. Option D. Focus solely on the publicly accessible areas of the server, assuming that private or protected data is irrelevant to the investigation. The correct answer is B. Immediately image the entire server's storage devices and begin a broad keyword search for terms related to illegal content, without further authorization. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics where the scope of an investigation is initially broad and potentially encroaches upon sensitive or privileged information. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough evidence collection with the legal and ethical obligations to respect privacy and confidentiality. A forensic investigator must exercise careful judgment to ensure that their actions are both legally permissible and ethically sound, avoiding overreach that could jeopardize the integrity of the investigation or lead to legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a meticulous process of defining the scope of the investigation based on the specific allegations and legal authority. This includes obtaining clear authorization, identifying relevant data sources, and employing forensic tools and techniques that are precise and targeted. Adhering to established forensic methodologies, such as the NIST framework, ensures that evidence is collected, preserved, and analyzed in a forensically sound manner. This approach upholds the principles of due process, privacy, and the integrity of the evidence, aligning with the regulatory framework for computer hacking forensic investigators. Specifically, within the U.S. regulatory framework, this would involve adhering to rules of evidence, search warrant requirements, if applicable, and privacy laws like the Stored Communications Act and the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ensuring that only lawfully obtained evidence is collected and analyzed. Incorrect approaches analysis. Collecting all available data without a clearly defined scope or legal authorization is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates privacy rights and could lead to the inadvertent acquisition of privileged information, e.g., attorney-client communications, medical records, rendering such data inadmissible and potentially exposing the investigator and their organization to legal liability. It also risks contaminating the investigation with irrelevant data, making the analysis more complex and time-consuming. Failing to document the collection and analysis process meticulously is another critical failure. Proper documentation is essential for chain of custody, reproducibility, and to demonstrate compliance with legal and procedural requirements. Without it, the integrity of the evidence can be challenged, and the investigator may be unable to defend their findings in court. This directly contravenes best practices and regulatory expectations for forensic investigations. Ignoring potential legal constraints or assuming broad authority to access any data encountered during the investigation is a direct violation of legal and ethical standards. Forensic investigators must operate within the bounds of the law, respecting jurisdictional limitations and the rights of individuals. Overstepping these boundaries can lead to the exclusion of evidence and professional sanctions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a systematic, legally informed, and ethically grounded approach. This begins with understanding the precise nature of the alleged offense and the legal authority granted for the investigation. A clear, documented plan outlining the scope, objectives, and methodologies is crucial. Throughout the investigation, continuous adherence to established forensic best practices, meticulous documentation, and a commitment to respecting privacy and legal boundaries are paramount. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel or clarification from superiors is a professional imperative. Question 12. To address the challenge of preserving the integrity of digital evidence during an investigation governed by U.S. legal standards, an investigator seizes a laptop suspected of containing evidence of a cybercrime. The investigator needs to proceed with examining the laptop's contents. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of digital forensic evidence handling and admissibility? Option A. Immediately connect the laptop to the network and begin searching for relevant files using standard operating system tools. Option B. Inform the owner of the laptop that it will be held for an indefinite period while the investigation proceeds. Option C. Create a forensically sound bit-for-bit image of the laptop's hard drive and conduct all subsequent analysis on this image. Option D. Power on the laptop and manually browse through files and folders, noting down any suspicious items. The correct answer is A. Immediately connect the laptop to the network and begin searching for relevant files using standard operating system tools. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics: the potential for evidence to be inadvertently altered or compromised during the initial seizure and preservation phase. This is particularly critical under the U.S. regulatory framework, which emphasizes the integrity of evidence to ensure its admissibility in legal proceedings. The Daubert standard, for instance, requires that scientific evidence be reliable and based on sound methodology. In a forensic investigation, this translates to meticulous adherence to chain of custody and preservation techniques. The correct approach involves immediate and proper documentation of the seizure, followed by the creation of a forensically sound image of the digital media. This image is a bit-for-bit copy, preserving the original data in its exact state at the time of acquisition. This process is fundamental to maintaining evidence integrity and is implicitly or explicitly supported by guidelines from organizations like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, which provide best practices for digital forensics. By creating an image, the investigator can then perform all subsequent analysis on a copy, leaving the original evidence untouched and thus preserving its evidentiary value. This aligns with the principles of due process and the need for reliable evidence in any legal context. An incorrect approach would be to directly analyze the original drive. This action directly violates the principle of preserving the original evidence. Any modification, however minor, made to the original drive during analysis could be grounds for challenging the admissibility of the evidence in court. This failure to maintain evidence integrity is a significant regulatory and ethical breach. Another incorrect approach would be to only document the seizure without creating a forensic image. While documentation is crucial, it does not substitute for the preservation of the data itself. Without a forensically sound copy, the original data remains vulnerable to alteration, and the investigator cannot confidently assert that the data analyzed is the same as the data seized. This also falls short of best practices and could lead to the exclusion of evidence. The professional decision-making process in such situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the legal and regulatory requirements for evidence handling within the relevant jurisdiction. In this case, U.S. This includes familiarizing oneself with established forensic methodologies and best practices. When faced with a potential evidence seizure, the investigator must prioritize preservation techniques that minimize the risk of alteration. This involves a systematic approach. First, secure and document the scene and the evidence. Second, acquire a forensically sound image of the digital media. And third, conduct all analysis on the acquired image. This methodical approach ensures that the integrity of the original evidence is maintained throughout the investigation, thereby maximizing its admissibility and reliability in any subsequent legal proceedings. Question 13. Process analysis reveals that a critical server within a U.S.-based financial institution has been exhibiting unusual network activity, suggesting a potential unauthorized intrusion. The incident response team has been activated, and a forensic investigator is tasked with examining the affected server. The investigator's primary objective is to determine the extent of the compromise and identify any exfiltrated data. Given the sensitive nature of the data and the regulatory environment, which of the following actions best aligns with U.S. federal guidelines for digital forensic investigations and ensures the admissibility of evidence? Option A. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the server's hard drives using write blockers and document the entire process, including the chain of custody, before any live analysis is performed. Option B. Rely solely on the server's existing event logs and application logs to reconstruct the timeline of events, assuming they are accurate and complete. Option C. Immediately connect to the server remotely and begin analyzing running processes and network connections to understand the live threat. Option D. Begin copying critical files and directories from the server to a secure location for immediate analysis, prioritizing speed over detailed documentation of the acquisition process. The correct answer is C. Immediately connect to the server remotely and begin analyzing running processes and network connections to understand the live threat. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid incident response and the strict adherence to legal and regulatory frameworks governing digital evidence. The forensic investigator must balance the urgency of containing a potential data breach with the imperative to preserve the integrity of evidence in a manner that will withstand legal scrutiny. Failure to properly document and chain of custody can render critical evidence inadmissible, jeopardizing any subsequent legal action or internal disciplinary measures. The investigator's actions must be guided by established protocols that ensure both the effectiveness of the investigation and compliance with relevant U.S. federal laws and guidelines pertaining to digital forensics. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the systematic and documented collection of digital evidence, aligning directly with the principles of the U.S. legal system and forensic best practices. Specifically, it emphasizes the creation of forensic images, the meticulous maintenance of chain of custody, and the adherence to established forensic methodologies. These practices are crucial for ensuring the admissibility of evidence in court, as mandated by rules of evidence and case law that require proof of authenticity and integrity. The investigator's actions are grounded in the need to demonstrate that the evidence was collected in a manner that prevents tampering or alteration, thereby upholding the integrity of the investigation and the legal process. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing and analyzing live data on the compromised system without creating a forensic image first is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action violates the principle of preserving the original evidence. Live analysis can alter volatile data, e.g., RAM contents, network connections, that is crucial for understanding the full scope of the incident and can be lost permanently. This directly contravenes guidelines from organizations like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, which are foundational for U.S. federal digital forensics. Furthermore, failing to document the initial steps of evidence collection, such as the creation of a forensic image and the chain of custody, constitutes a failure to meet the evidentiary standards required by U.S. courts. This lack of documentation can lead to the evidence being challenged and deemed inadmissible, undermining the entire investigation. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the system's built-in logging mechanisms without independent forensic imaging, is also professionally unacceptable. While logs can be valuable, they can be tampered with or incomplete. A forensic image captures the entire state of the storage media at a specific point in time, providing a more comprehensive and defensible record. Without this, the investigator cannot definitively prove the integrity of the data presented from the logs, potentially leading to legal challenges regarding the authenticity of the evidence. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the incident's potential impact, the applicable legal and regulatory requirements, and established forensic best practices. The investigator must first assess the situation to determine the urgency and the type of evidence likely to be present. This assessment should then inform the selection of appropriate forensic tools and methodologies. Crucially, every step of the process, from initial seizure to final analysis, must be meticulously documented. This includes creating forensic images, verifying their integrity using cryptographic hashes, and maintaining a detailed chain of custody log. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel or senior forensic experts is a critical step to ensure compliance and the defensibility of the investigation. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual outbound network traffic originating from a critical server, deviating significantly from its established baseline behavior. The traffic is not immediately identifiable as malicious, but is highly irregular. What is the most appropriate initial step in assessing and responding to this situation, adhering to U.S. federal cybersecurity incident response guidelines? Option A. Immediately disconnect the affected server from the network to prevent any further potential data exfiltration or lateral movement by an attacker. Option B. Initiate a full system forensic image of the affected server and begin immediate analysis to understand the nature of the traffic and its potential impact. Option C. Temporarily suspend all network activity on the affected server and conduct a rapid, documented risk assessment to determine the severity and potential impact of the anomalous traffic before proceeding with further actions. Option D. Alert senior management to the anomaly and await their explicit instructions on how to proceed with the investigation. The correct answer is B. Initiate a full system forensic image of the affected server and begin immediate analysis to understand the nature of the traffic and its potential impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the monitoring system has detected anomalous activity that could indicate a security breach, but the nature and scope of the potential compromise are unclear. A forensic investigator must balance the need for immediate action to contain potential damage with the requirement to preserve evidence meticulously. The chosen approach must align with the regulatory framework governing digital forensics within the specified jurisdiction, which for this exam is U.S. federal law and relevant NIST guidelines. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process for risk assessment and incident response, as mandated by U.S. federal regulations and industry best practices like NIST SB 800-61, Rev. 2, Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. This approach involves a structured analysis of the detected anomalies to determine their potential impact and the appropriate level of response. It emphasizes the importance of establishing a baseline, identifying deviations, and then escalating based on a reasoned assessment of risk, ensuring that actions taken are proportionate and do not compromise the integrity of potential evidence. This aligns with the legal and ethical obligations to conduct investigations thoroughly and competently. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, broad system shutdowns without a prior risk assessment fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and can lead to unnecessary disruption and data loss. This could violate regulations requiring organizations to implement reasonable security measures and incident response plans that are effective but not overly burdensome. Furthermore, such a hasty action could destroy volatile evidence crucial for a forensic investigation, potentially hindering the ability to determine the root cause and extent of a breach, which could have legal ramifications if an organization is found to have failed in its duty of care. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the anomalies due to a lack of immediate understanding, represents a failure to implement adequate security monitoring and incident response capabilities. This directly contravenes regulatory requirements that mandate proactive security measures and timely responses to detected threats. Ethically, it demonstrates negligence and a disregard for the organization's security posture and the protection of its data. Finally, An approach that involves immediate data deletion or alteration based on a preliminary, unverified suspicion is a severe ethical and regulatory violation. This constitutes evidence tampering, which has significant legal consequences and undermines the entire purpose of forensic investigation. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of evidence preservation principles and the legal chain of custody. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Initial observation and documentation of the anomaly. 2. A rapid, preliminary assessment of the potential impact and scope. 3. Consultation with relevant stakeholders to understand the business context of the affected systems. 4. Development of a tiered response plan based on the assessed risk, prioritizing containment and evidence preservation. 5. Execution of the response plan with meticulous documentation at every step. 6. Continuous reevaluation of the situation and adjustment of the response as more information becomes available. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that the organization has experienced a series of data breaches over the past year. As a computer hacking forensic investigator, you are tasked with developing a comprehensive plan for the next forensic investigation following a suspected internal data exfiltration. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment would best ensure the integrity of the investigation and the defensibility of the findings? Option A. Conduct a thorough, documented risk assessment to identify potential threats to the investigation's integrity, evidence preservation, and operational continuity, and develop mitigation strategies based on this assessment. Option B. Perform a quick, informal assessment of obvious risks, focusing primarily on the technical aspects of data recovery. Option C. Immediately begin data acquisition from all suspected systems, prioritizing speed to capture volatile data before it is overwritten. Option D. Rely on the IT department's existing security protocol to manage any risks that may arise during the forensic process. Correct answer is C. Immediately begin data acquisition from all suspected systems, prioritizing speed to capture volatile data before it is overwritten. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in digital forensics, balancing the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to minimize disruption and maintain data integrity. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing a risk assessment approach that is both comprehensive enough to uncover potential threats and efficient enough to avoid unnecessary delays or data alteration. The investigator must consider the potential impact of various risks on the investigation's outcome, the organization's operations, and legal compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that prioritizes threats based on their likelihood and potential impact. This aligns with best practices in digital forensics and information security, which emphasize a proactive and structured methodology. By identifying potential risks, e.g., data corruption, evidence tampering, system downtime, privacy breaches, assessing their probability and severity, and then developing mitigation strategies, the investigator can ensure that the forensic process is conducted in a controlled and defensible manner. This approach supports the integrity of the evidence, minimizes the risk of legal challenges, and demonstrates due diligence. It also allows for informed decision-making regarding resource allocation and investigative priorities. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on immediate evidence acquisition without a prior risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to overlooking critical risks, such as the potential for the acquisition process itself to alter volatile data or introduce new vulnerabilities. It fails to consider the broader implications of the investigation on the organization's operations and compliance obligations. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that does not adequately identify or prioritize potential threats. This could result in a false sense of security, leaving the investigation vulnerable to unforeseen issues that could compromise evidence or lead to legal repercussions. For instance, failing to assess the risk of data spoliation during the collection phase could render crucial evidence inadmissible. Finally, an approach that relies on ad hoc decision-making without a documented risk assessment framework is also professionally unsound. This lacks the rigor and accountability expected in digital forensics. It makes it difficult to justify the investigative steps taken, especially if challenges arise regarding the integrity or admissibility of evidence. This approach is prone to bias and can lead to inconsistent and unreliable investigative outcomes. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk assessment framework that is integrated into the overall incident response and forensic investigation plan. This involves 1. Identification of potential risks relevant to the specific incident and environment. 2. Analysis of the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 3. Prioritization of risks based on their severity. 4. Development of mitigation and contingency plans. 5. Documentation of the entire process for accountability and review. This systematic approach ensures that the investigation is conducted with a clear understanding of potential challenges and that appropriate measures are in place to address them, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the investigation and the evidence. Question 16. Consider a scenario where a significant data breach has occurred, exposing sensitive customer information. As a forensic investigator, you are tasked with assessing the risks associated with this breach to inform the incident response and remediation strategy. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for a comprehensive risk assessment in this context? Option A. Focus exclusively on immediate containment measures to stop further data exfiltration, deferring any formal risk assessment until the incident is fully resolved. Option B. Implement security controls based on general industry, best practices, and common threat intelligence, without conducting a specific risk assessment tailored to the breach's unique characteristics. Option C. Conduct a systematic risk assessment by identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and documenting the findings to guide remediation priorities. Option D. Prioritize remediation efforts based on the most publicly visible or sensational aspects of the breach, assuming these represent the greatest immediate risk. The correct answer is C. Conduct a systematic risk assessment by identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and documenting the findings to guide remediation priorities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for rapid incident response and the requirement for a thorough, legally defensible risk assessment. The pressure to contain a data breach quickly can lead to shortcuts in the risk assessment process, potentially overlooking critical vulnerabilities or misjudging the impact. The complexity arises from balancing immediate containment needs with the long-term implications of the assessment, which will inform remediation strategies and future security investments. Accurate risk assessment is foundational to effective incident response and compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that prioritizes identifying and evaluating potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to the specific data breach. This aligns with best practices in digital forensics and incident response, emphasizing a structured methodology. By focusing on the likelihood and impact of identified threats, the assessment provides a clear basis for prioritizing remediation efforts and resource allocation. This methodical approach ensures that decisions are data-driven and defensible, minimizing the risk of regulatory noncompliance or legal challenges. It directly supports the principles of due diligence and prudent security management expected under relevant frameworks, even if not explicitly detailed in a single document for this exam. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on immediate containment without a formal risk assessment fails to address the root causes of the breach and the potential for future incidents. This approach is professionally deficient because it prioritizes a reactive measure over a proactive, strategic understanding of the threat landscape. It risks overlooking significant vulnerabilities that, if left unaddressed, could lead to further breaches or more severe consequences. This can result in regulatory scrutiny for failing to implement adequate security measures. Prioritizing the most visible or sensational aspects of the breach over a comprehensive risk evaluation is also professionally unsound. This approach is driven by perception rather than objective analysis, leading to misallocation of resources and potentially ineffective remediation. It can result in a failure to address less obvious but equally critical risks, leaving the organization exposed. This can be seen as a failure of professional judgment and due diligence. Implementing remediation steps based on anecdotal evidence or industry buzzwords without a formal risk assessment is a significant ethical and professional failing. This approach lacks the rigor required for effective security management and can lead to wasted resources on solutions that do not address the actual risks. It demonstrates a lack of systematic problem solving and can result in noncompliance with security standards that mandate risk-based approaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals in computer hacking forensics must adopt a structured, evidence-based approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope of the assessment in relation to the incident. 2. Identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities through systematic analysis. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and potential impact of these threats. 4. Documenting all findings and the rationale behind risk ratings. 5. Using the assessment to inform and prioritize remediation and incident response strategies. This process ensures that actions are proportionate to the risks, legally defensible, and aligned with professional ethical obligations to protect data and systems. Question 17. The investigation demonstrates a critical security incident has occurred, leading to unauthorized access and potential data exfiltration. While immediate containment measures are being implemented, the forensic team needs to determine the most effective way to integrate a comprehensive risk assessment into the ongoing response and subsequent remediation efforts to prevent future occurrences. Which approach best balances the urgency of the incident with the necessity of a thorough risk evaluation? Option A. Delay the risk assessment until all forensic evidence has been collected and analyzed, even if this means waiting several weeks after the incident has been contained. Option B. Perform a quick, high-level risk assessment based on initial observations, prioritizing only the most obvious threats to expedite the containment process. Option C. Focus solely on containing the immediate breach and assume that once the system is secured, the risk assessment can be performed at a later, less critical time. Option D. Conduct a detailed risk assessment that identifies all potential threats, vulnerabilities, and their likelihood and impact, using the findings to guide immediate containment and inform long-term remediation strategies. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed risk assessment that identifies all potential threats, vulnerabilities, and their likelihood and impact, using the findings to guide immediate containment and inform long-term remediation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid incident response and the requirement for a thorough, legally defensible risk assessment. Forensic investigators must balance the urgency of containing a breach with the meticulous process of identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing risks to prevent recurrence and inform remediation strategies. Failure to conduct an adequate risk assessment can lead to ineffective incident response, increased organizational vulnerability, and potential regulatory noncompliance. The challenge lies in integrating risk assessment principles into the dynamic and often chaotic environment of a live investigation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a systematic and documented process of identifying potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the likelihood and impact of their exploitation. This aligns with best practices in cybersecurity and incident response, which mandate a proactive and informed approach to risk management. By focusing on understanding the root causes and potential future impacts of the incident, the investigator ensures that remediation efforts are targeted and effective, thereby reducing the overall risk profile of the organization. This methodical approach is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with general principles of information security governance, which underpin many regulatory frameworks by requiring organizations to manage risks effectively. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on immediate containment without a subsequent risk assessment. This fails to address the underlying vulnerabilities that allowed the incident to occur, leaving the organization susceptible to similar attacks. Ethically, this represents a failure to provide comprehensive service and a disregard for the organization's long-term security posture. From a regulatory perspective, many frameworks implicitly or explicitly require ongoing risk management and vulnerability assessment, which this approach neglects. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only considers the most obvious threats. This lacks the depth required to identify sophisticated or emerging threats and may overlook critical vulnerabilities. Professionally, this demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and could lead to a false sense of security. Regulatory bodies often expect a comprehensive assessment that considers a wide range of potential risks, and a superficial one could be deemed insufficient, leading to potential penalties for inadequate security controls. A third incorrect approach would be to delay the risk assessment until long after the incident is resolved. This disconnects the assessment from the immediate context of the breach, making it harder to accurately identify the specific vulnerabilities exploited and the immediate risks posed. It also delays the implementation of crucial remediation measures, prolonging the organization's exposure to risk. This approach is professionally unsound, as it hinders effective incident lifecycle management and can be seen as a failure to act with reasonable promptness in addressing security concerns, which is a common expectation in cybersecurity regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment within an incident investigation by first understanding the scope and nature of the incident. This involves gathering all available evidence to identify the attack vectors, exploited vulnerabilities, and the extent of the compromise. Following this, a structured risk assessment framework should be applied to analyze the identified threats and vulnerabilities, considering their likelihood and potential impact on the organization's assets and operations. This analysis should inform the development of remediation and mitigation strategies. The entire process must be meticulously documented to provide an auditable trail, demonstrating due diligence and compliance with organizational policies and relevant regulatory expectations. This iterative process ensures that incident response is not just about fixing the immediate problem, but also about strengthening the organization's overall security posture. Question 18. Upon reviewing a compromised server, a forensic investigator is presented with a critical situation where the business demands immediate access to operational data, while simultaneously understanding the need to preserve evidence for potential legal action. The investigator has a limited window before the server is scheduled for a full system wipe and rebuild. Which of the following approaches best adheres to the principles of computer hacking forensics in this scenario? Option A. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the server's hard drives, document the chain of custody meticulously, and conduct all subsequent analysis on the forensic image, ensuring the original evidence remains untouched. Option B. Prioritize extracting the most critical operational data directly from the live server, assuming that any forensic imaging will take too long and the data will be lost if not retrieved quickly. Option C. Immediately begin analyzing the live system to identify the nature of the compromise and extract critical operational data, as the business's immediate needs are paramount and the server will be wiped regardless. Option D. Perform a quick file system copy of the most likely affected directories to expedite data retrieval, and then proceed with a partial forensic image of the remaining drives. The correct answer is A. Create a bit-for-bit forensic image of the server's hard drives, document the chain of custody meticulously, and conduct all subsequent analysis on the forensic image, ensuring the original evidence remains untouched. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid evidence acquisition and the imperative to maintain the integrity and admissibility of that evidence. Forensic investigators must navigate the complexities of digital environments, where data can be volatile and easily altered. The pressure to deliver timely results, often from stakeholders with limited technical understanding, can lead to shortcuts that compromise the investigation's validity. The investigator's judgment is critical in balancing speed with meticulous adherence to established forensic principles and legal requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the foundational principles of digital forensics: preservation, identification, collection, examination, and reporting. By prioritizing the preservation of the original evidence through imaging and working solely on a forensic copy, the investigator upholds the integrity of the data. This aligns with best practices that ensure the evidence remains unaltered and can be reliably presented in legal proceedings. The systematic documentation of every step, from chain of custody to analysis methods, is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and transparency, which are paramount for admissibility in a U.S. legal context. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of evidence being challenged on grounds of tampering or improper handling, thereby supporting the overall validity of the investigation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Directly analyzing the original drive without creating a forensic image is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action violates the principle of evidence preservation, as any interaction with the original media risks altering or destroying critical data. This could lead to the exclusion of evidence in court, rendering the entire investigation moot and potentially exposing the investigator and their organization to legal repercussions. Furthermore, failing to document the chain of custody meticulously is a critical breach. The chain of custody is a legal requirement in U.S. courts to prove that the evidence has been handled properly and has not been tampered with. A broken chain of custody can lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible. Analyzing data without a clear, documented methodology also undermines the scientific rigor expected in forensic investigations. This lack of transparency makes it impossible for others to replicate the analysis, raising doubts about its accuracy and reliability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in computer hacking forensics must adopt a decision-making process rooted in established forensic methodologies and legal frameworks. When faced with time constraints, the primary consideration should always be the preservation of evidence integrity. This involves a commitment to creating forensically sound copies of all digital media before any analysis is performed. Thorough documentation is not an optional extra, but a mandatory component of every forensic task, ensuring accountability and admissibility. Investigators should always ask, does this action preserve the integrity of the evidence? And can I clearly and defensibly document every step I take? If the answer to either question is uncertain, the investigator must default to the most conservative and legally sound procedure, even if it requires more time. This proactive adherence to best practices and legal mandates safeguards the investigation and upholds professional integrity. Question 19. System analysis indicates a critical security incident has occurred on a corporate server, potentially involving unauthorized data exfiltration. The incident response team is on standby, and the primary objective is to contain the breach and preserve evidence for a potential legal investigation. The forensic investigator is tasked with ensuring the integrity of the digital evidence collected from the compromised server. Which of the following actions, if taken as the initial step in addressing the compromised server, best upholds forensic best practices and regulatory compliance? Option A. Create a forensically sound, bit-for-bit image of the server's storage media using write-blocking hardware or software before any other actions are taken. Option B. Begin analyzing the server's running processes and network connection to identify the source of the breach. Option C. Immediately disconnect the server from the network to prevent further data loss or exfiltration. Option D. Collect and review system logs from the server to reconstruct the timeline of events. The correct answer is C. Immediately disconnect the server from the network to prevent further data loss or exfiltration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for rapid incident response and the strict requirements for maintaining the integrity of digital evidence. Forensic investigators must balance the urgency of containing a potential breach with the imperative to collect and preserve evidence in a manner that is legally admissible and scientifically sound. Failure to adhere to established forensic protocols can render evidence useless in legal proceedings or internal investigations, undermining the entire purpose of the forensic examination. The investigator must exercise careful judgment in selecting tools and methodologies that are both effective for containment and compliant with best practices for evidence preservation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the preservation of evidence integrity from the outset. By creating a forensically sound image of the affected system before initiating any containment or remediation actions, the investigator ensures that the original state of the digital evidence is captured. This imaging process, using write-blocking hardware or software, prevents any modification to the original data. This aligns with fundamental forensic principles and is implicitly supported by guidelines and best practices that underpin the admissibility of digital evidence in legal contexts, such as those that would be considered under a U.S. regulatory framework for computer forensics. The captured image, then, serves as the basis for all subsequent analysis and containment efforts, ensuring that any actions taken do not alter the original evidence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately isolating the affected system by disconnecting it from the network without first creating a forensic image. This action, while seemingly a logical containment step, directly modifies the state of the system by potentially altering timestamps, network connection logs, and other volatile data. This violates the principle of preserving the original evidence and can lead to the loss of crucial information. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, this failure to preserve evidence integrity can lead to the exclusion of evidence in court, professional reprimand, and a breach of duty to conduct a thorough and unbiased investigation. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with analysis and containment actions directly on the live system, without any form of imaging or write blocking. This is highly problematic, as any interaction with the live system, including running diagnostic tools or attempting to remove malware, will inevitably alter the data. This direct manipulation of the original evidence is a fundamental violation of forensic best practices and would almost certainly render the collected data inadmissible in any legal proceeding. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of understanding of forensic principles and a disregard for the integrity of the investigation. A third incorrect approach involves relying solely on the system's built-in logging mechanisms for evidence without creating a forensic image. While system logs can be valuable, they are often volatile, can be tampered with, and may not capture all relevant information. Furthermore, relying solely on logs without imaging the entire system means that the investigator is not preserving the complete context of the digital evidence, including file system metadata, deleted files, and other crucial artifacts that might not be captured in standard logs. This approach fails to meet the rigorous standards required for forensic evidence collection and can be challenged on grounds of incompleteness and potential unreliability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in computer hacking forensics must adopt a systematic, evidence-centric approach. The decision-making process should always begin with an assessment of the need to preserve the integrity of the original digital evidence. This involves understanding the potential impact of any action on the evidence and prioritizing methods that minimize or eliminate such impact. When faced with an incident, the investigator should first consider how to create a forensically sound copy of the affected systems. This initial step, often involving imaging, forms the bedrock of a defensible forensic investigation. Subsequent actions, such as containment and analysis, should be performed on the forensic image whenever possible, or with extreme caution and meticulous documentation if performed on the live system. This methodical approach ensures that the findings are reliable, admissible, and ethically sound, upholding the investigator's professional responsibility. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that a critical server has been compromised, and the forensic investigator has been tasked with preserving and analyzing the evidence. The investigator has immediate access to the live system, which is still operational but potentially volatile. The investigator needs to determine the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure the integrity of the evidence while commencing the investigation. Option A. Create a forensically sound, bit-for-bit image of the affected storage media using a hardware write blocker before any analysis of the live system. Option B. Immediately begin analyzing the live system's running processes, network connections, and memory dumps to understand the active attack vectors. Option C. Inform the system administrators to shut down the server to prevent further damage, and then proceed with a physical examination of the hardware. Option D. Selectively copy files that appear suspicious based on their file names and modification dates to a separate storage device for immediate analysis. The correct answer is B. Immediately begin analyzing the live system's running processes, network connections, and memory dumps to understand the active attack vectors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the forensic investigator must balance the need for thoroughness in data preservation with the practical constraints of time and resources, all while adhering to strict legal and ethical guidelines. The investigator's actions directly impact the integrity of the evidence and the potential outcome of any subsequent legal proceedings. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach is both legally sound and technically effective. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the preservation of the original evidence in a forensically sound manner, minimizing the risk of alteration or contamination. This aligns with the fundamental principles of digital forensics, which mandate that evidence be collected and analyzed in a way that maintains its integrity and admissibility in court. Adhering to established forensic methodologies, such as creating bit-for-bit copies and using write blockers, ensures that the original data remains unaltered. This meticulous process is crucial for meeting the evidentiary standards required by the legal system and upholding the ethical obligations of a forensic investigator. An incorrect approach that involves directly analyzing the live system without proper imaging or isolation would fail to meet professional standards. This is because live system analysis inherently carries a high risk of altering volatile data, such as system logs, running processes, and network connections, which could be critical to the investigation. Such alteration would compromise the integrity of the evidence, making it inadmissible in court and violating the investigator's ethical duty to preserve evidence. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively copying files based on initial assumptions without a comprehensive forensic image, risks overlooking crucial evidence or introducing bias into the investigation. This selective approach can lead to incomplete findings and may not satisfy the legal requirement for a thorough and unbiased examination. Furthermore, failing to document each step of the process meticulously, including the tools used and the procedures followed, constitutes a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Proper documentation is essential for demonstrating the chain of custody and the forensic soundness of the investigation, and its absence undermines the credibility of the findings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the legal and regulatory requirements of the jurisdiction. This involves identifying the specific laws and guidelines governing digital evidence collection and preservation. Next, the investigator must assess the nature of the incident and the potential types of evidence involved. This assessment informs the selection of appropriate forensic tools and techniques. A critical step is to prioritize evidence preservation, always opting for methods that minimize alteration of the original data. This includes creating forensically sound images of storage media and documenting all actions taken. Finally, continuous adherence to ethical principles, such as objectivity, integrity, and competence, should guide every decision throughout the investigation.